Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Bible study here. We're reading today from the book of Hebrews, which we've been reading from. We had read from previously a few weeks ago, if you remember. We've been away from it for a little while because we had a few special Sundays in between, Reformation Sunday and All Saints Sunday, which had different epistle readings. But we're back in the book of Hebrews now for this week and for next week. This week we're reading from chapter 9. Next week we'll be reading from chapter 10, and then on to some new things as we get to the last Sunday in the church year, and then the beginning of Advent, which means the beginning of a new church year, and different sets of readings and everything like that. So we're reading from chapter 9, verses 24 down to verse 28. Now, I had mentioned this previously about the book of Hebrews, but just as by way of kind of a reminder, I suppose, what we have here in this book of the Bible is the author of this letter trying to help us see the connections between the Old Testament and the New Testament, to see the connections between the sacrifices, for example, the worship, the temple, the priests, and all these things, and Jesus. And to see how all of those things pointed forward and prepared the way for Jesus and are completed and fulfilled in him, that Jesus is the completion and the fulfillment of those things. And this reading today is no exception. That is the point of all of it. Now, I'm going to highlight just really quickly here a few phrases to keep in our mind that'll help us understand what this reading is talking about. And the first one is right here. Has entered is important. Then down here, has appeared. All right. And then one more time, will appear a second time. Okay, so these three phrases, has appeared, or has entered, has appeared, will appear a second time. This is what will help us to understand what exactly is going on here. So what I want to do for you here is draw a little picture. So I'm just going to push the paper up here a little bit and draw a picture. And the picture I'm drawing for you here is like an overhead view from above, like looking down if you were up in the sky in a helicopter or something, not that they had helicopters at the time, of the temple in Jerusalem and what that would look like, okay? So it was a big building and had a big open courtyard, which is all this area around here. But in the inside, you had, this is really the temple itself. This whole building would be called the temple, and there'd be even more outside of here that we don't need to bother drawing. But this whole building would be called the temple. But this part right here, this central part, really is the temple. And right across here, you would have a squiggly line here represents a curtain. All right, it's not a wall, it's a curtain. Okay, when Jesus dies on the cross, and we're told the temple curtain was torn in two from top to bottom, this is the curtain it was talking about. Behind this curtain, you have a bunch of things, but the most important thing is this, the Ark of the Covenant, which we talked about a few weeks ago. This is very roughly what the Ark, the Covenant. Look at the big box with sticks for carrying it, and it has angels on top. Actually, I put the wings the wrong way. The wings should be going the other way, towards the middle. But oops, you get the point. There's the Ark of the Covenant back here, and it wouldn't take up all that space, but I'm not that detailed of a drawer. So the Ark of the Covenant would be in here. Now, just out here on the other side of the curtain, you would have a little altar for offering incense. The priest would stand in here, or any of the priests would stand in this part, and they would come in here and offer incense and other things in here. There'd be candlesticks and a table with bread on it and all that kind of stuff in here, but we don't need to get into all those details. So what we have here, this part is called the Holy of Holies. Okay, this part here is just called the Holy Place. So in the holy place, only priests can go in here, not just anybody can wander into the holy place. And into the Holy of Holies, only the high priest can go in there, and he only does it once a year. It's not something he goes in there all the time. Once a year on a day called, what can I put this? The Day of Atonement, which is the day where there would be paying for sins. All right, so once a year they would have the Day of Atonement. The high priest would go in there, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. Now, out here in this courtyard, there would also, and this is probably drawing it too big, but oh well. You would have a really big altar. It wouldn't be as big as the holy place itself, so my picture's out of proportion here. But you would have a really big altar, so big that to take the animals and the sacrifices up there where they would need a ramp. So that's what this is. There's your ramp up, and you'd have a basin and things like that here. Now, on this Day of Atonement, the people would come to the temple, and there'd be all kinds of people standing around. They are there to receive God's forgiveness. That is the reason they have come to the temple, to witness the sacrifice. But it's not just a matter of witnessing it, it's a matter of receiving the forgiveness that comes from it, was part of the Day of Atonement. So they would all come. It's really a community kind of thing, as they would come together to make these sacrifices, and to worship God and to receive his forgiveness. So they would come together on the Day of Atonement for this purpose. Now, the first thing that would happen is the priest, the high priest, the one who can go into the Holy of Holies, he would appear. Okay, so we're going to put him right here. This is our high priest, okay? He would appear, and he would make the sacrifice on this altar of bulls and goats and things like that, that were set up to be the sacrifices for the Day of Atonement. He would take some of the blood from this sacrifice into the Holy of Holies. This is the one time of the year he would go in there. They would take the blood from this sacrifice into the Holy of Holies and sprinkle it here on the Ark of the Covenant. And then switch to red here. Just sprinkle some blood right in there, okay? That was offering the blood, the sacrifice, to God on behalf of all the people. Okay, they're all waiting out here. Now, he would go in there, and they would wait out here for him to come back out again, because he didn't just stay in there. He went in there, and then when he had sprinkled the blood, he came back out again. And when he was out here, he brought some of the blood with him, and now he sprinkled it on the people. And as he did, they received God's forgiveness. So he took the blood from the sacrifice into the Holy of Holies and brought it back and sprinkled it on the Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat there. He goes into God's presence and offers the blood, and then brings some of it back out again and sprinkles it on the people for their forgiveness. Okay, so these are the ideas we want to keep in mind here. Now we're going to go back up to the text and just read through this and see if we can make some connections here. For Christ has entered not into the holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true things, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. Nor was it to offer himself repeatedly, as the high priest enters the holy places every year with blood not his own. For then he would have to suffer repeatedly since the foundation of the world. But as it is, he has appeared once for all at the end of ages to put away sin, and by the sacrifice of himself. And just as it is also appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment, so Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly waiting for him. So the motion here of the high priest on the Day of Atonement is what helps us to understand this reading, okay? We want to start here in the middle where it says, but he has appeared. Let's call that number one, step one. But he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. So just like here, on the Day of Atonement, the first step is the high priest would appear and he would make the sacrifice, right? The high priest isn't sacrificing himself, he's sacrificing animals, and he would have to appear every year and do this again and again and again. Jesus has appeared once at the end of the ages which that should get us thinking too, that Jesus appeared at the end of the ages. We're living in the end of the ages still right now. If Jesus appeared then, it's still going on. Anyways, but Jesus has appeared once for all at the end of ages to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. So what the high priest did every year, and which was a sacrifice of an animal, Jesus did once, which was a sacrifice of himself, which took away sin once and for all. So Jesus appeared to do that. He has entered then. So what we're talking about here is of course, is the cross. So I'm going to put that there just so we're abundantly clear about this, what we're talking about, his death on the cross. So he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself, by his death on the cross. Now, Christ has entered, having given himself as a sacrifice, has entered not into the holy places made with hands, not into the temple, which is just, he says, a copy of the true things, but into heaven itself. So where is Jesus gone? The high priest entered into the Holy of Holies here, but Jesus, it says, has entered into heaven itself. This is an interesting little thing here too. That's not the temple made with, or the holy places made with hands, not the temple, which it says is a copy of the true thing. The true thing is heaven. So the temple, as God told his people to set it up, was like a copy, or it has this similarity to heaven, but it's not the true thing. But Jesus has entered into the true thing, into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God, just like the high priest did here, but in the real sense. Jesus isn't just in the temple standing in the place of God's presence on earth. Jesus is standing before God in heaven to do what? To be there on our behalf. When Jesus ascended into heaven, he went there to go sit at God's right hand on our behalf. He didn't go there just to leave us alone now to wander around on the earth on our own. He went there into heaven to be our mediator, our advocate, to pray for us, to intercede for us, to remind God again and again of the sacrifice that he has made in his blood for our forgiveness. Jesus pleads day in, day out, night and day on our behalf. So this is the second thing. He entered. He has appeared. He has entered. And then down number 3 here, will appear a second time. So, and just as it is appointed for a man to die once, and after that comes judgment. This is just what happens, all right? This is just an observation of nature. What, right? People only die once. Now, there's exceptions to that. Someone like Lazarus in the Bible, who gets raised from the dead and then ends up dying again later on, would be a kind of an unusual exception. But the rule here would be that people die once, all right? And when they die comes judgment. That's what the scripture teaches us, okay? So, and just as it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment, so Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time. And we'll go back down here again. So the high priest appears, makes the sacrifice, takes the blood into God's presence, and comes back out again. Now, when he came back out, he would then apply the forgiveness that God had granted there at the Ark of the Covenant to the people. He would sprinkle the blood on them. But this is what it tells us here. Jesus will appear a second time, not, and this is huge, not to deal with sin. Why? Because sin is already dealt with. This deals with sin. The sacrifice of himself deals with sin. But Jesus will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly waiting for him. And that's a beautiful description of what our life is right now, eagerly waiting for him. And this is, if you don't take anything else out of all of this, there's a lot to think about here. It's not, maybe doesn't seem like the most practical thing. We're talking kind of theological concepts here, but here's something to take out of this eagerly waiting for him. These people down here, when they would come on the Day of Atonement and the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies to take the blood in there of the sacrifice, they were out here waiting. And it wasn't just ho-hum, oh, I wonder when he'll make it back out of there. It was a nervous, even maybe, kind of waiting. Because, well, if God didn't accept the sacrifice, then he wasn't going to come back out of there. He would be dead. Now, there's no recorded instance of that ever happening, but that's because God is faithful to his promise. God said, this is how you do the Day of Atonement. And and God forgives sins, right? And this is what God does on the Day of Atonement and through all of these sacrifices that he had set up for his people. But for these people out here, it was a nervous waiting of anticipation for when the high priest would return to apply that forgiveness to them, to know that the sacrifice was accepted. Now, we know that Jesus' sacrifice is accepted because Jesus is risen from the dead. That's the proof of that. In that sense, he's already appeared a second time. But in the way this reading is talking about it, we're still waiting for him to appear a second time. So this is what should guide and direct our lives in this world, is that we're out here waiting for him to come back, not to deal with our sin, because our sin's already dealt with, but to save us. So our lives are shaped by this waiting for Jesus. So there's a whole bunch of things here to talk about. We didn't even go over all the sentences, but I think what I wanted to do is try and give you the idea. What's the idea behind all of this? And hopefully that helps you make some sense of it, and hopefully that gives you something to talk about. And if you have any questions, as always, send them my way, and I'm always happy to do my best to answer your questions. God bless. Bye-bye.